They thought I was just a burden, a retirement plan they could manipulate until they stole my deed. But when my father forgot to hang up and laughed about using me, he didn't know I was listening. 14 days later, I sold the house out from under them for $980,000 cash. Now, the only thing they own is the realization that they underestimated the daughter they tried to break. My name is Harmony Pierce, and by the time I steered my silver SUV up the winding switchbacks of Golden Ridge, my body felt less like a biological organism and more like a collection of frayed wires held together by caffeine and sheer will. I was 29 years old, a lead UX designer for a high-pressure medical technology firm, and I had just clocked out of a 12-hour shift that involved restructuring the entire user interface for a digital triage system. My eyes burned. My lower back throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache. All I wanted, the only thing that had kept me from screaming during the fourth emergency meeting of the day, was the thought of my sanctuary. The house was a modern timber frame structure perched on the hillside, a gift from my late great-aunt Margaret, but the house itself was just shelter. My true home, the place where my soul actually resided, was the detached glass greenhouse on the south side of the property. Aunt Margaret had spent over 20 years curating it. It was a living library of chlorophyll and memory. Inside that glass structure, the air always smelled of crushed peppermint, damp earth, and the sweet, heavy scent of heirloom tomatoes ripening on the vine. It was where she had taught me how to propagate succulents when I was 7. It was where I went to cry when I was 16 and heartbroken. It was the only place in the world that belonged entirely to me and the ghost of the woman who had actually loved me. I turned the final corner of the driveway, my tires crunching over the gravel, my brain already simulating the sound of the sliding glass door opening and the humidity hitting my face. Then I slammed on the brakes. The seatbelt locked hard against my collarbone, knocking the wind out of me. I sat there, gripping the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned the color of bone, staring through the windshield. My brain refused to process the visual data. It was a glitch. It had to be a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. The greenhouse was gone. Where the glittering, Victorian-inspired glass structure had stood for 2 decades, there was now only a raw, gray scar. A massive slab of wet concrete had been poured over the footprint of my sanctuary. The beautiful, intricate steel framework that Margaret had commissioned from an artist in Santa Fe was not just dismantled, it was mangled. I saw the twisted metal beams jutting out of a massive rented dumpster that had been dropped carelessly onto my lawn, crushing the creeping thyme that grew along the walkway. I killed the engine, but I could not move. I just sat there, shaking. The window was down, and the breeze carried the truth to me. The scent of lavender and tomato vines was gone. In its place was the heavy chemical stench of wet cement, the sharp odor of cut lumber, and the oily smell of heavy machinery. It smelled like a construction site. It smelled like destruction. The front door of the main house opened. My father, Gerald Pierce, stepped out onto the porch at 62. He still carried himself with the unearned confidence of a man who had never truly faced the consequences of his own mediocrity. He was wearing his favorite beige cashmere sweater, a glass of red wine in one hand, his other hand resting on his hip as he surveyed the devastation with a look of supreme self-satisfaction. My mother, Lynn, followed him a moment later. She was 60 years old and dressed for a gala rather than a Tuesday evening at home, draped in a silk floral kimono and wearing enough gold jewelry to weigh down a small child. She held a martini glass, the condensation dripping onto her manicured fingers. The rage did not come immediately. It was preceded by a cold, hollow shock that made my knees weak as I forced myself out of the car. I walked toward them, my boots feeling heavy on the gravel. Gerald beamed at me. He actually beamed? "Harmony. Finally," he called out, his voice booming with a jovial authority that made my stomach turn. "You are late. You missed the pouring. But look at this foundation. It is perfect." I stopped at the edge of the wet concrete. I looked down. I could see the crushed remains of a rare jade vine peeking out from under the wooden forms they had used to mold the cement. Aunt Margaret had brought that cutting back from Hawaii 15 years ago. It was dead, buried under 6 inches of gray sludge. "What did you do?" I whispered. My voice sounded foreign, like it was coming from someone else. Gerald laughed, a dismissive, hearty sound. He walked down the steps and stood beside me, unrolling a large sheet of paper he had tucked under his arm. He held it up for me to see. It was a blueprint. "We are upgrading the asset, honey," he said, tapping the paper. "Look at this. We are getting rid of that eyesore of a shed and putting in a proper entertainment deck. 2,000 square feet of composite wood, maintenance-free, over here, in the corner, a 6-person hot tub with hydrotherapy jets, and here, a sky lounge with a fire pit looking right down into the valley." I stared at the drawing. It looked like something from a catalog for a generic, soulless resort. "Eyesore?" I choked out the word. That was Aunt Margaret's greenhouse. Lynn chimed in then, taking a sip of her drink and waving her hand vaguely at the dumpster. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. Harmony. It was a dirty glass box full of bugs and dirt. It looked country. This is going to look like a high-end resort. You should be grateful your father has the vision to improve the property value. We are doing this for you." "For me?" I turned to look at her, and I could feel the tears pricking the corners of my eyes, hot and angry. "You destroyed it. You did not ask me. You did not send a text. You waited until I went to work and you bulldozed the only thing I care about." Gerald stepped in, his smile tightening just a fraction. He rolled up the blueprints. It was not safe. Harmony. The glass was old. I had a contractor look at it, and he said it was a liability. If a pane fell and cut someone, you would be sued into bankruptcy. I made an executive decision. I am protecting your investment. He pointed his wineglass toward the dumpster. "Besides, all those old pots and plants were just clutter. You are a professional woman now. You do not have time to be playing in the dirt. You need a place to entertain. Imagine the parties we can host on this deck." I looked at the dumpster again. I saw the shattered remains of the terracotta pots. I saw the root ball of the night-blooming jasmine, ripped out and drying in the dry Colorado air. "Who is paying for this?" I asked, my voice trembling. Gerald took a sip of his wine, savoring it. "Do not worry about the logistics. I handled the deposit and the materials today. The contractor needed a down payment to start pouring, so I just used the card on file in the home office." My blood ran cold. "The card on file?" I asked, stepping closer to him. "You mean my business credit card? The one I use for server costs and software licenses?" "We are a family. Harmony," Lynn said, her tone sharp, warning me to watch my tone. "It is a family expense. Since we are living here and managing the property for you, it is only fair that you cover the capital improvements. It is a write-off. Anyway." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. They had not just destroyed my sanctuary, they had forced me to finance its destruction. I calculated the cost in my head. Concrete work alone, in this economy, had to be at least $15,000. The lumber, the labor. They had likely charged over $30,000 to my name in a single afternoon without asking permission. "You cannot do this," I said, my voice rising, finally cracking through the shock. "You have to stop this. You have to cancel the contractor. I did not agree to this." Gerald's face changed instantly. The jovial, benevolent father figure vanished, replaced by something darker, something I had seen glimpses of over the last 2 years, but never this clearly. He stepped into my personal space, towering over me. He was 6 feet 2 inches tall, and he used every inch of it to loom. "Lower your voice," he said, his tone low and dangerous. I took a step back, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I have spent 2 years living in this house," Gerald hissed, stepping forward again so I was forced to retreat toward the driveway. 2 years fixing your leaky faucets, watching the perimeter, managing the landscaping. That is sweat equity. Harmony. I have paid for this renovation with my time and my experience. You think you can manage a property like this alone? You are a girl staring at a computer screen all day. You do not know the first thing about the real world." I hit the bumper of my car. I was trapped between the vehicle and my father. "We are doing you a favor," Lynn called out from the porch, her voice shrill. "Do not be an ungrateful brat. Your father has a bad back, and he was out here all day supervising the crew to make sure you did not get ripped off." Gerald leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could smell the expensive Merlot on his breath. "You are going to go inside," he said, pointing a finger at my chest. "You are going to wash your face, and then you are going to come out here and thank me for building you a deck that will actually make this place worth something. Do you understand me?" I looked into his eyes. There was no love there. There was no concern. There was only the cold, hard entitlement of a man who believed he owned me. He truly believed that my money, my house, and my life were simply extensions of his own. I looked past him, at the wet concrete that was hardening by the second, sealing away the soil where Aunt Margaret had taught me the names of flowers. I realized then that the greenhouse was not just a building. It was the last boundary I had, and they had just poured cement over it. "I understand," I whispered. "Good," Gerald said, straightening up and smoothing his cashmere sweater. He smiled again, that sickening, self-satisfied smile. "Dinner is in an hour. We ordered steaks. You paid for those, too." He turned and walked back toward the house, gesturing for Lynn to follow him inside. I stood alone in the driveway as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting long, jagged shadows across the property. The smell of the wet concrete filled my lungs, choking me. I looked at the dumpster one last time. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run to the pile of debris and try to salvage a cutting, a leaf, anything. But I did not move. Instead, I reached into my pocket and touched the cold metal of my car keys. A strange, terrifying clarity was beginning to settle over me, replacing the shock. They thought they had broken me. They thought that by destroying my sanctuary, they had solidified their control. They were wrong. They had just cleared the ground for a war. I took a deep breath of the toxic, chemical air, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to cry. I felt the urge to calculate. I turned and walked toward the house, leaving the ghost of the greenhouse behind me. The heavy wooden front door closed with a solid thud, sealing me inside with the enemy. To understand why the sight of that wet concrete broke something fundamental inside me. You have to understand that this house was never supposed to be a hostel. It was supposed to be a fortress. 2 years ago, my life looked entirely different. I was living in a 600-square-foot apartment in downtown Denver, breathing in smog and exhaust. But I was free. I was already the lead user experience designer for Neuropath Studio, making a salary that most people my age only dreamed of. Then came the letter from the estate attorney. Great Aunt Margaret had passed, and in a move that shocked everyone in the family, she had bypassed my parents entirely. She left everything to me: the timber frame house, the 3 acres of land on the ridge, and the greenhouse. It was paid off, no mortgage, an asset valued at over $1.2 million, dropped into my lap with a single condition: that I treat it as a home, not a piggy bank. I moved in within a month. For the first time in my life, I felt grounded. I would wake up at 6 in the morning, make coffee, and walk out to the greenhouse to check the humidity levels for the orchids, before logging into my workstation. I was balancing a high-stress corporate career with the quiet, methodical rhythm of nature. It was perfect. I was safe. Then came the phone call that dismantled everything. It was a Tuesday evening in November. I remember the wind was howling outside, rattling the double-paned windows. When I picked up the phone, my mother, Lynn, was already sobbing. It was a theatrical, heaving sound that I had been conditioned since childhood to interpret as a code-red emergency. She told me it was over, all of it. Gerald, my father, had put everything they owned into a private equity scheme that turned out to be a vaporware scam. Their savings, their retirement funds, the equity in their suburban tract home, it was all gone. The bank was foreclosing. They had 48 hours to vacate. "We are going to be on the street." "Harmony," she had wailed, her voice cracking. "Your father is sitting in the dark in the garage. I am afraid of what he might do. He is 60 years old. He cannot start over." Then came the hook, the one she knew would catch me. His back is so bad. Honey, you know he has those herniated discs. He cannot lift a box. He cannot sleep in a shelter on a cot. We just need a place to land. Just for 3 months. Just until the settlement comes through and he can find a consultancy gig. Please, we are family. I looked around my silent, spacious living room. I thought about Aunt Margaret. She had been the black sheep, the one who kept her distance from Gerald and Lynn. Once, while we were repotting spider plants, she had told me to be careful with my empathy. She said, "Do not let your kindness be twisted into a noose." Harmony. But Margaret was dead, and the people on the phone were my parents. The programming ran deep. The concept of filial duty was burned into my operating system. I told myself that refusing them would make me a monster. I told myself that 3 months was manageable. "Come home," I had said. That was the mistake that cost me 2 years of my life. The first month was a performance of gratitude. They were careful. They tiptoed around. But the timeline shifted with terrifying subtlety. 3 months became 6. The settlement money my father talked about was always delayed by some mysterious bureaucratic red tape. 6 months became a year. Then, without a discussion, it simply became the new reality. The physical takeover was gradual but absolute. It started with the stairs. About 4 months in, Gerald began complaining loudly about the agony of climbing the staircase to the guest bedrooms on the second floor. He would grimace, clutch his lower back, and let out sharp hisses of pain every time he took a step. "I cannot do it," Lynn told me one morning over breakfast, her eyes pleading. "Hearing him in pain is killing me. The master suite is on the ground floor. Harmony, you have young knees. Would it be so terrible if we swapped? Just until his back heals." I moved my things upstairs the next day. I gave up the room with the soaking tub and the walk-in closet, the room Aunt Margaret had designed for herself, and retreated to the smaller guest room. The moment I moved out, they moved in, and miraculously, once they had the master suite, Gerald's back pain seemed to become much more manageable, especially when he wanted to go play 9 holes of golf with his old buddies. The financial parasitism was even worse because it was silent. In 2 years, Gerald and Lynn never paid a single utility bill. They never bought groceries. They never offered to pay the property taxes, which were over $8,000 a year. The first time I tried to bring it up, 6 months into their stay, I made the mistake of doing it over dinner. I had an Excel spreadsheet printed out. I simply asked for a contribution of $500 a month to help cover the rising cost of heating the house, since they kept the thermostat at 75 degrees day and night. Lynn put down her fork. Her eyes filled with tears instantly. "I cannot believe this," she whispered to Gerald, ignoring me. "We lose everything. Our dignity, our home, our lives. And our own daughter wants to charge us rent? Like we are strangers? Like we are tenants?" Gerald did not yell. He did something worse. He went cold. He placed his napkin on the table, stood up, and walked out of the room without a word. For 3 days, he looked right through me. He would not answer if I said hello. He treated me like a ghost in my own house. The tension was so thick, so suffocating, that I eventually broke. I apologized. I told them to forget the money. I bought expensive wine as a peace offering. That was the moment the power dynamic flipped completely. They learned that I would pay any price to avoid the emotional heavy lifting of a confrontation. Once they knew they could live for free, they started rewriting the narrative of why they were there. They were no longer charity cases. They were the benevolent caretakers. They started changing the furniture. Aunt Margaret's hand-carved oak coffee table disappeared one day while I was on a conference call. When I came downstairs, it was gone, replaced by a beige, oversized leather ottoman that looked like it belonged in an airport lounge. "We put that old wood thing in the garage," Gerald said, not looking up from the television. "It was a shin bruiser. This is more modern. It opens up the room." Bit by bit, my house began to look like them. Gaudy gold picture frames replaced the local art. Artificial flowers appeared in the hallway. And then came the guests. They started inviting their friends over, Other couples from their old country club life who didn't know the full story of their bankruptcy. I would come downstairs to get water and find a living room full of strangers drinking my bourbon. Gerald would wrap an arm around my shoulder, his grip tight and possessive, and announce to the room, "We are just so glad we can be here to support Harmony." You know how millennials are. She was struggling to manage a property this size all by herself. It is a lot of work. We decided to move in to help her stabilize. The guests would nod approvingly, looking at me with pity. "Isn't that nice?" They would say, "You are lucky to have such supportive parents." I wanted to scream that I was the one paying for the bourbon they were drinking, the heat that warmed them, and the roof over their heads. But I stood there, frozen, forcing a smile, playing the part of the grateful daughter because I was terrified of the scene Gerald would cause if I contradicted him. The worst part, however, was how they treated my work. To Gerald, a job that did not involve wearing a suit and driving to a downtown office was not a job. It was a hobby. I was managing complex design systems for medical triage software, leading a team of 12 people, and earning a salary that put me in the top 5% of earners in the state. But to them, I was just playing on my computer. If I came out of my office at noon to grab lunch, Lynn would be on the couch watching daytime talk shows. "Must be nice," she would say, not looking away from the screen. "Walking around in your socks at noon. Your father worked 60 hours a week for 30 years. He never had time to nap in the middle of the day." "I am not napping," I would say, my jaw tight. "I am working. I have been on call since 7 in the morning." Gerald would chuckle from the kitchen. "Clicking a mouse is not work. Harmony, digging a ditch is work. Closing a sale is work. You are just arranging colors. Do not pretend it is stress." They chipped away at me, day after day. They made me feel small. They made me feel like an imposter in my own career. I stopped talking about my promotions. I stopped sharing my wins. There was no point in celebrating a $40,000 bonus if the people you told just rolled their eyes and asked why you hadn't emptied the dishwasher. That was why the greenhouse was so important. It was the only square footage on the deed that they did not want. It was too humid for Lynn's hair and too dirty for Gerald's shoes. Every evening, after I finished my work, and after I had navigated the minefield of the dinner table, I would escape out the back door. The moment the glass door slid shut behind me, the noise of their television and their passive-aggressive comments would fade. I would turn on the warm yellow grow lights. I would smell the damp soil. I would prune the tomato vines and mist the ferns. In there, I was not the ungrateful daughter. I was not the burden who needed her parents to manage her life. I was the owner. I was the gardener. I was Aunt Margaret's niece. I would stand in the center of that glass sanctuary and tell myself that I could endure it. I told myself that as long as I had this space, I could survive their invasion. I viewed my endurance as a virtue. I thought I was being strong. I did not realize then that patience is not a virtue when you are dealing with parasites. It is just food. I looked at the house as a shelter they needed. They looked at the house as a territory they had conquered. And while I was busy feeling guilty about asking for utility money, they were already looking at the greenhouse and seeing a deck where they could drink wine and laugh about how easy it was to control me. I was holding onto a rope, thinking I was pulling them to safety, not realizing they had already tied the other end into a noose around my neck. And 2 years of silence, 2 years of keeping the peace, had led me directly to the moment where I stood staring at wet concrete. Realizing that my sanctuary was not just gone, it had been executed. The destruction of the greenhouse was a physical violation, but what happened 3 days later was a surgical strike on the only thing that allowed me to survive in that house: my income. I was preparing for the most critical presentation of my career at Neuropath Studio. We were launching a new interface for a mental health tracking platform, a project I had been leading for 6 months. The stakes were incredibly high. If the board of directors signed off on the user journey I had designed, the project would move to the development phase, and I would trigger a performance clause in my contract worth a bonus of $40,000. $40,000. That was not just money. That was an escape hatch. That was a down payment on a condo in Seattle, or a year of rent in an apartment where no one would ever touch my things again. I spent the morning turning my home office into a bunker. I checked the lighting 3 times, adjusting the ring light so that it washed out the shadows under my eyes. Shadows earned from 3 nights of sleeplessness after the greenhouse incident. I checked my microphone levels. I closed every browser tab except for my slide deck and the prototype. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, exactly 1 hour before the call, I walked out to the hallway. I took a piece of bright neon orange construction paper and a thick black marker. I wrote, in letters 3 inches high, "Meeting extremely critical, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Do not disturb under any circumstances." I taped it to the outside of my office door at eye level. You would have to be blind to miss it. Just to be absolutely certain, I took a photograph of the sign and uploaded it to the family group chat we used. Or rather, the chat I used to give them updates they ignored. Big presentation at 2. I typed, "Please keep the noise down. This determines my bonus." I watched the read receipts tick over. Lynn replied first. It was just a single emoji, a face yawning. Then Gerald chimed in, "Real work does not require a warning sign. Harmony, just close the door." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keypad, wanting to type back a retort about how my fake work paid for the wine he was currently drinking. But I didn't. I could not afford the adrenaline spike. I needed to be calm. I needed to be the cool, competent professional that Neuropath paid me to be. I put the phone on silent, face down on the desk, and took a deep breath. Just get through the next 60 minutes. I told myself, get the signature, get the check, get out. At 2 o'clock sharp, the Zoom window populated. 8 faces appeared on my dual monitors. These were not my usual team members. This was the executive leadership team, the CEO, the chief product officer, and 2 key investors from the venture capital firm backing the project. They were people who spoke in millions and expected perfection. I smiled, my voice steady and modulated. "Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for making the time." I launched into the presentation. For the first 20 minutes, I was in the zone. The outside world ceased to exist. I was not the daughter of 2 narcissists living in a house that was being stolen from her. I was Harmony Pierce, lead UX architect. I walked them through the friction points of the old system. I showed them the empathy maps. I demonstrated how the new color theory would reduce user anxiety during panic attack logging. I could see the CEO nodding. The investor in the top right corner was leaning in, taking notes. The energy in the virtual room was shifting. They were buying it. I could feel the momentum building. That specific thrill when you know you have nailed the logic and the emotion of a pitch. Then, I heard the handle of my office door rattle. My heart stopped. I kept talking, my voice not wavering, praying it was just a mistake. Maybe Lynn was vacuuming and bumped it. But the rattle came again, louder this time. I tried to speed up, moving to the data visualization slide, hoping to keep the executive's focus on the screen and not on my background. "And here you can see the retention rates based on the beta testing," I said, pointing my cursor to the graph. "We are projecting a 30% increase in daily active users." The door behind me flew open. It did not just open, it swung wide, hitting the doorstop with a loud thwack that surely picked up on my noise-canceling microphone. I froze. On my screen, I saw the eyes of 8 executives shift from my slide to the space over my left shoulder. Gerald walked in. He was not alone. Behind him were 3 other men, golf buddies. Judging by the polo shirts and the flushed faces, they were all holding tumblers of amber liquid. My father was gesturing grandly with a glass of scotch, his voice booming as if he were standing on a stage. "And this is the home office I was telling you about," Gerald announced, completely ignoring the fact that I was wearing a headset and speaking. "We converted the 3rd bedroom. Great view of the ridge." I scrambled for the mouse, trying to find the mute button, but my hands were shaking. "Dad," I hissed, turning around in my chair, "I am in a meeting." Gerald stopped and looked at me, blinking as if he was surprised to find me in my own office. He looked at his friends and chuckled, a low, condescending sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, relax. Harmony," he said, waving his hand dismissively. He turned back to his friends. "See? This is the work I was telling you about. Sitting in her pajamas, talking to a screen, and she calls it a meeting." The men behind him laughed. It was a wet, heavy, masculine laughter that felt like a slap. I looked back at my monitor. The CEO was not smiling. The investors looked confused. My camera was still on. They could see everything. They could see my father mocking me. They could see the intruders in my workspace. I managed to hit the mute button, but the damage was already bleeding out. "Get out!" I whispered frantically, standing up and trying to block the camera view with my body. "I have a sign on the door. Get out!" Gerald's face darkened. The jovial host vanished, replaced instantly by the man who hated being challenged. He had been embarrassed in front of his audience. He stepped forward, encroaching on my space. "Do not shush me in my own house," he snapped, his voice rising. The words "my own house" echoed in my head, absurd and infuriating, but I did not have time to unpack them. I reached for the door handle to close it, to salvage the last shreds of my career. Gerald saw the movement. He thought I was trying to push him out. He thought I was physically challenging his authority in front of his golf partners. He shoved me. It was not a playful nudge. It was a hard, angry push to my shoulder. I was wearing socks on the hardwood floor. I lost my traction. I stumbled backward, my hip catching the sharp edge of the oak desk. The pain was blinding white and immediate. I flailed, trying to catch my balance, and my hand came down hard on the keyboard. My arm swept across the desk, knocking over my water bottle and sending the wireless mouse skittering across the floor. I crashed into my chair, which rolled back and hit the wall with a deafening bang. For a second, there was total silence in the room. Gerald looked at me, his eyes wide, not with apology, but with the shock of someone who realized he might have gone too far, but was already formulating a reason why it was my fault. I looked at the monitor. The camera was still on, the microphone was muted, but the video was crystal clear. 8 people had just watched my father barge in, mock me, and physically assault me. Then, the connection died. I had hit the space bar or the escape key in my fall. The Zoom window vanished, replaced by my desktop wallpaper. I sat there on the floor, my hip throbbing, water dripping onto my lap from the overturned bottle. Gerald cleared his throat. He adjusted his polo shirt. "Well," he said, his voice tight, "that was dramatic. You always have to make a scene, don't you?" He turned to his friends. "Sorry about that. Boys, she is very high-strung. Let's go look at the new deck plans." He turned and walked out, closing the door behind him. I did not move for 5 minutes. I could not breathe. I stared at the black webcam lens, waiting for... I did not know what I was waiting for. Then came the notification sound. Ping. It was an email. I pulled myself up into the chair, my hands trembling so badly I could barely control the trackpad. I opened the inbox. The subject line was, "Contract Review, Neuropath Studio." It was from the Chief Operating Officer. "Dear Ms. Pierce, following the incident during today's executive review, we are terminating your contract effective immediately. While we value your design contributions, Neuropath handles sensitive patient data and requires a secure professional environment for all high-level strategy discussions. The chaotic nature of your workspace and the breach of privacy involving unauthorized individuals entering the frame during a confidential intellectual property presentation is a liability we cannot accept. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." I read it 3 times. Terminated. Liability. Breach of privacy. I looked at the time. It was 2:20 in the afternoon. 20 minutes ago, I had a career. I had a reputation. I had a $40,000 bonus within my grasp that was going to be my ticket to freedom. Now I had nothing. I heard laughter coming from the living room, the clinking of glass. Gerald was telling a story, his voice rich with confidence. I sat there, the water soaking into my jeans, the pain in my hip radiating down my leg. I realized then that I had been wrong about everything. I thought they were just lazy. I thought they were just selfish. I thought they were just taking advantage of a free ride. But as I read the word terminated again, the truth settled in my chest like a stone. They were not just parasites, they were predators. A parasite wants the host to stay alive so it can keep feeding. A predator does not care if the prey survives, as long as it eats. Gerald did not care if I lost my job. In fact, somewhere in his twisted subconscious logic, he probably preferred it. If I lost my job, I could not leave. If I lost my income, I would be stuck here with them, trapped in the mud just like my greenhouse. I closed the laptop. I did not cry. The part of me that used to cry over them had died under the wet concrete 3 days ago. This was something else. This was the cold, clinical assessment of a damage report. They had taken my sanctuary. Now they had taken my shield. I stood up, wincing as my hip protested. I walked to the door and ripped the neon orange sign off the wood. I crumpled it into a ball. I was done playing by the rules of a game where the other side was cheating. If they wanted to burn my life to the ground, fine, but they were about to learn that fire spreads, and I was the one holding the matches now. I fled the house 20 minutes after the screen went black. I could not breathe the same air as them. I grabbed my laptop, my car keys, and a hoodie, and I drove until the city lights of Denver swallowed the dark, quiet roads of Golden Ridge. I ended up at a 24-hour diner on Colfax Avenue, a place that smelled of burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. It was 3 a.m. I was sitting in a red vinyl booth with peeling tape on the seat, staring at a spreadsheet that was bleeding red ink. I was running the numbers. It was a grim autopsy of my financial life, without the neuropath contract, and with the severance clause voided due to misconduct. I had exactly 3 months of liquidity left. That was assuming I stopped eating and lived in the dark, but I had property taxes due in October. I had the insurance premiums for the house. And of course, I had the utility bills that Gerald and Lynn racked up as if they were running a casino. Electricity for the air conditioning they kept at 65 degrees. Water for the long showers. Gas for the fireplace they left running even in July. I was 29 years old, and I was staring at bankruptcy because I had been too polite to say no. Then, my phone buzzed against the Formica table. I looked at the screen. Dad. My stomach twisted. A physical wave of nausea rolled over me. I considered letting it go to voicemail. I considered throwing the phone into the half-empty cup of coffee, but the conditioning was deep. The fear that something was wrong, a fall, a fire, a medical emergency, kicked in before my brain could stop it. I slid the bar to answer. "What?" I said. My voice was raspy from holding back tears for 5 hours. "Harmony. Finally." Gerald's voice barked. "No hello. No apology for the meeting. No question about where I was at 3 a.m. You need to tell me how to reset the zone timers on this irrigation app." The contractor left in a huff, because I pointed out his shoddy wiring, and now the sprinklers on the new lower deck planters are not firing. I closed my eyes and pinched the bridge of my nose. He had destroyed my career, and he was calling me for tech support for the project that caused the destruction. "Dad," I said, "I am not at home. I just lost my job. I am trying to figure out how to pay the mortgage taxes." Gerald let out a loud, impatient sigh. "Do not be melodramatic. Harmony, you can figure that out later. Right now, these Japanese maples cost $400 each, and if they do not get water by dawn, they will go into shock. Just tell me which menu to click." I looked at the spreadsheet on my screen. I looked at the negative projection for November. I felt a profound, exhausting defeat. It was easier to just give him what he wanted so he would get off the phone. "Open the app," I said dully. "Go to Settings. Click on Manual Override. Select Zone 4. Set the duration for 10 minutes. There was a silence on the line, punctuated by his heavy breathing and the tapping of a screen. "Okay," he muttered. "Zone 4. 10 minutes. Yeah, I hear the water." He did not say thank you. "Good," he said. "That works. See? Was that so hard? You make everything such a production. Finally, You are useful for something today. Then, I heard the distinctive clack of a phone being set down on a hard surface. It sounded like glass, probably the patio table. He had not pressed the red button. He had just set the phone down, assuming the call was over, or perhaps not caring enough to check. My thumb hovered over the disconnect button. I should have hung up. I should have severed the connection and gone back to my misery. But then I heard the scrape of a chair and the sound of a lighter flicking. I put the phone to my ear. I pressed it so hard against my head it hurt. She is exhausting. Gerald's voice said. It was distant, but clear enough. He must have been sitting right next to the phone. She acts like she is the only person who has ever had a bad day at work. I held my breath. The background noise of the diner, the clatter of plates, the hum of the refrigerator, faded away. All I could hear was the wind on the deck of my house and the voices of my parents. Lynn spoke next. Her voice was slurred, likely from the third or fourth martini. Did she say she actually lost the contract? Lynn asked. Or just that she is in trouble? She lost it, Gerald replied. He sounded satisfied. He sounded like a man who had just won a bet. And honestly, Lynn, it is for the best. For the best? Lynn asked. But what about the money? Gerald laughed, a dry hacking sound. She is not going anywhere now, he said. That is the point. If she had gotten that bonus, she would have started getting ideas again, maybe buying a condo in the city, maybe trying to push us out. But now, she is broke. She is desperate. She needs this house more than ever, and she needs us to help her manage it. I froze. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I do not know. Jerry, Lynn said, she seemed on edge today. What if she tries to sell? What if she says she cannot afford the taxes and tries to dump the property? She cannot sell, Gerald said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming conspiratorial. I spoke to that lawyer buddy of mine, Bob, at the club yesterday. I laid out the groundwork. Groundwork? I have been documenting my back issues for 2 years. Lynn? Gerald's voice was smug. Every time I went to the chiropractor on her insurance? Documented. Every time I complained about the stairs? Documented. Bob says that in Colorado, if we have established residency for this long and I have a documented disability that requires stability, it is incredibly difficult to evict us. We have tenants' rights, even without a lease. He paused to take a drag of his cigar. I could hear the exhale. If she tries to kick us out, Bob says we can tie it up in court for 18 months. We claim hardship. We claim elder abuse. We claim that we contributed sweat equity to the value of the home, like this deck. By the time a judge even looks at the file, she will be drowned in legal fees. She will have to settle, and the settlement will be us staying right here until we die. My hand was shaking so violently that the image on my laptop screen blurred. This was not just laziness. This was a siege. They had been consulting lawyers on how to steal my house while I was buying them groceries. She is a burden, Gerald said, exhaling smoke again. His voice was casual. Cruel. God. She is such a personality drain, always moping, always acting the martyr. But she has her uses. She is like a money tree. You just have to shake her a little bit, make her feel guilty, and the cash falls out. Lynn giggled. It was a high, girlish sound that made me want to vomit. Well, as long as she pays for Greece, Lynn said, I am not canceling that trip. Jerry, I told everyone we are going to Santorini. She will pay, Gerald said confidently. She has savings. She will dip into that 401k if she has to. I will just have a flare-up with my sciatica next week. I will stay in bed for 2 days. She will feel so bad she will book the tickets just to make me feel better. I listened to them plan my manipulation like they were planning a dinner menu. And listen, Gerald continued, when we get back from Greece in 3 weeks, I am taking the office. What? Lynn asked. Her office, Gerald said. It has the best view. Now that she does not have a job anymore, she does not need a dedicated room. She can work at the kitchen island. I'm going to move my humidor in there. Maybe put in a leather recliner. Turn it into a proper smoking room. But what if she says no? Lynn asked. She won't. Gerald replied. He sounded so sure, so utterly convinced of his dominance. She is weak. Lynn, she is exactly like her father. My brother was a pushover, and she is a pushover. She craves approval. I will just tell her that her clutter is stressing me out and making my blood pressure rise. She will pack up those monitors within an hour. I stared at the phone. I looked at the black screen where the call duration timer was ticking upward. 6 minutes. 7 minutes. They were going to take my office. They were going to take the room where I had built my career, the room I had defended earlier that day, and turn it into a shrine to his cigar smoke. They were going to force me to work at the kitchen table while they lived like royalty in the rooms I paid for. And they were betting on my love. They were betting that I was too weak, too desperate for family connection, to ever fight back. I realized then that she is a burden was not just an insult, it was a projection. They were the burdens. They were 20-pound weights strapped to my ankles, dragging me down into the deep ocean, and they were laughing while I drowned. I did not scream. I did not unmute the phone and confront them. I knew, with a sudden crystal clarity, that confronting them would yield nothing but gaslighting. They would deny it. They would say I misunderstood. They would play the victim. I needed to be smarter than that. I reached out a trembling finger and tapped the red end call button. The connection severed. I sat in the silence of the diner. The spreadsheet on my screen was still open. The red numbers were still there. But the fear was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, hard rage that felt like steel in my spine. They wanted to play legal games. They wanted to use tenants' rights and sweat equity. They wanted to talk about who owned what. I closed the spreadsheet. I opened a new browser tab. I typed in the name of the estate lawyer who had handled Aunt Margaret's will. Daniel Ross. I looked at the time. It was almost 4 a.m. I was not going to pay for their retirement. I was not going to pay for their Greece trip. And I was certainly not going to let Gerald smoke cigars in the room where I had just lost my career. They thought I was a money tree. They forgot that trees have roots. And when you poison the roots, the tree does not just die, it falls, and it usually crushes whatever is standing underneath it. I pulled out a napkin and a pen. I started writing a list. It was not a to-do list. It was an eviction plan. 1. Confirm ownership status. Absolute. 2. Find a buyer who pays cash. 3. Do it while they are in Greece. I looked at the phone sitting on the table. It was innocent, black, silent, but it had just delivered the most important information of my life. My father did not love me. My mother did not respect me. They were barely even family anymore. They were hostile occupants. And I was about to treat them exactly like what they were. I waited until 8 o'clock in the morning. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store, watching the commuters rush by, clutching their coffees and their briefcases. They looked stressed, but I envied them. They were going to jobs they still had, returning to homes that were actually theirs. I pulled out my phone and scrolled until I found the contact I had not used in 24 months. Daniel Ross. Daniel was the estate attorney who had handled Aunt Margaret's will. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his late 50s who had always looked at my parents with a polite, veiled suspicion. I remembered the day I signed the deed. Sitting in his mahogany-paneled office, he had handed me the pen, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Harmony, this house is a fortress, but only if you pull up the drawbridge. If family starts applying pressure, you call me before you sign a single scrap of paper." I had not called him when they moved in. I had not called him when they took the master bedroom. But I was calling him now. He answered on the second ring. "Harmony," he said. His voice was warm, but there was an edge of concern to it. "I have not heard from you in a long time. Is everything all right?" I took a deep breath. I needed to be precise. I could not be the emotional, weeping daughter. I needed to be a client. "Hello, Daniel," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I need to ask you a question about real estate law. A hypothetical question." Daniel paused. I could hear the rustle of papers on his end. "Go ahead." "Suppose," I began, staring at a stray shopping cart rolling across the asphalt. "Suppose I own a property, Fee simple. My name is the only name on the deed. There is no mortgage, no liens. But suppose there are two people living in that house who are not on the lease, because there is no lease. They are guests who have overstayed their welcome by 2 years. I swallowed hard. And suppose these guests are claiming they have established residency. Suppose they are threatening to use medical conditions and sweat equity to block an eviction. In this hypothetical scenario, Daniel, do I have the right to sell the property, or am I trapped? There was a long silence on the line. When Daniel spoke again, his voice had shifted. It was no longer warm. It was surgical. Harmony, he said, dropping the pretense. We are talking about Gerald and Lynn, aren't we? I did not answer. He sighed. Listen to me carefully. Ownership and possession are two different things. You hold the title. That gives you the absolute right to dispose of the asset. You can sell that house today if you want to. The law does not require you to guarantee housing for adult occupants who have no rental agreement, regardless of their relationship to you. I felt a small knot in my chest loosen. So I can sell it? Technically, yes, Daniel said, but practically, that is where it gets messy. He went on to explain the nightmare scenario I had feared. If I tried to sell the house on the open market, listing it on Zillow, putting a sign in the yard, no buyer would touch it. No young couple wants to buy a dream home that comes with a pair of angry, litigious parents refusing to leave the master suite. No bank would finance a mortgage for a buyer if the house was not vacant at closing. Gerald was right about one thing. He could scare away any normal purchaser just by sitting on the porch and looking miserable. So I am stuck, I said, gripping the steering wheel. Unless I spend a year in court fighting them? Not necessarily, Daniel said slowly. There is another sector of the market. It is not pretty, but it exists for exactly this kind of situation. Tell me, I said. We call them distressed asset acquisitions, Daniel explained. There are investment firms, private equity mostly, that specialize in high-conflict properties. They do not care about the view or the school district. They care about the margin. They buy properties for cash, usually with a quick close, and they take on the burden of the occupancy. He emphasized the word burden. It echoed the word Gerald had used to describe me just hours ago. Daniel continued, These are not families looking for a home. Harmony. These are corporations. They have their own legal teams on retainer. They have private security contractors. They know exactly how to navigate the eviction laws to the letter, and they do not operate with emotion. If they buy your house, the problem of removing your parents shifts from you to them. My heart started to beat faster. This was the nuclear option. This was not just asking my parents to leave. This was unleashing a corporate shark into the tank. Who are they? I asked. There is a firm called Summit Ridge Capital, Daniel said. They have been buying up properties in the Denver metro area aggressively. They look for high-value assets with what they call title complications. Your house, a timber frame on 3 acres in Golden Ridge, mortgage-free, is exactly the kind of meat they hunt for. I needed to know the risks. I needed to be sure. If I sell to them, I asked, can my parents sue me? Can they claim I defrauded them, or that I violated some duty of care? Daniel's voice was firm. Absolutely not. Unless you signed a document granting your parents a life estate, which I know you did not, because I hold the original deed, you have no legal obligation to house them. You are not their guardian. You are not their landlord. You are a property owner selling an asset. What happens after the title transfer is entirely between the new owner and the occupants. He paused, and his tone softened slightly. But Harmony, you need to understand what this means. Summit Ridge is not polite. They will not negotiate with your father about his bad back. They will not care about your mother's social standing. They will change the locks. They will remove personal property. They will treat your parents like trespassers because, legally, that is what they will be. He took a breath. They will also offer you less than market value. They have to factor in the legal costs of the eviction. You will take a hit on the price. I thought about the money. I thought about the $1.2 million the house was worth. If Summit Ridge offered me less, say 20% less, I would still walk away with nearly $1 million in liquid cash. And in exchange, I would be free. I asked the question that mattered most. How fast can they close? If the title is clean, Daniel said, 7 to 10 days, cash wire. 10 days. My parents were leaving for Greece in 4 days. They would be gone for 2 weeks. The timing was not just good, it was perfect. It was a window of opportunity that felt like divine intervention, or perhaps Aunt Margaret reaching out from the grave to hand me a weapon. Do you have a contact? I asked. Daniel hesitated. I could hear the conflict in his silence. He was a family lawyer. He dealt in mediation, in preserving relationships. What I was asking him to facilitate was a scorched earth policy. Harmony, he said quietly. Once you ring this bell, you cannot unring it. This will destroy your relationship with them permanently. There is no coming back for Thanksgiving dinner after you sell the house out from under them to a liquidation firm. I looked out the window. I saw a mother walking with her toddler in the parking lot, holding his hand, checking for cars, a protective gesture, a loving gesture. I thought about the greenhouse. I thought about the wet concrete. I thought about the Zoom call. And mostly, I thought about my father's voice on the phone saying, "She is like a money tree. Shake her and the cash falls out." There is no relationship left to destroy. Daniel, I said, they paved over it. I heard him exhale. It was a sound of resignation. Okay, he said, write this down. Her name is Monica Blake. She is the regional acquisition manager for Summit Ridge. She is effective. I grabbed a receipt from the passenger seat and a pen. I wrote down the number. Thank you. Daniel, I said. Good luck, kid, he replied. And Harmony? Yes. Make sure you keep that money somewhere they can never touch it. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a long time, staring at the number on the crumpled receipt. It was just 10 digits, but it looked like the combination to a safe. I was no longer the victim. I was no longer the daughter scrambling to fix the sprinklers so her father wouldn't yell at her. I had just graduated. I had stepped out of the emotional cage they had built for me and entered the cold, rational world of contract law. They wanted to use the law to trap me? Fine, I would use the law to erase them. I put the car in gear. I was not going back to the house yet. I had a phone call to make, and I needed to sound like a woman who was ready to sell $1 million asset for cash, no questions asked. I was done being Harmony the daughter. Today, I was the seller, and I was about to close the deal of a lifetime. I dialed the number Daniel Ross had given me. It rang 4 times before a woman answered. Her voice was not warm, and it was not polite. It was the voice of someone who negotiated for a living and did not like to waste time. This is Monica Blake, she said. I sat up straighter in the driver's seat of my car. I cleared my throat. Ms. Blake, my name is Harmony Pierce. Daniel Ross gave me your number. I have a property in Golden Ridge. I am looking to liquidate immediately. There was a pause. The mention of Daniel's name clearly bought me a few seconds of her attention. Go on, she said. It is a custom timber frame home, 3,200 square feet, sitting on 3 acres of land, unobstructed valley views. It was appraised last year at $1.2 million. There is no mortgage. The title is clean and in my name only. I could hear the clicking of a keyboard on the other end. She was likely pulling up the tax records or the Zillow estimate as I spoke. Okay, she said, her tone slightly more interested. Golden Ridge is a hot market. Why are you calling me instead of a realtor? If the title is clean, you could list it tomorrow. What is the catch? I gripped the phone tighter. This was the moment. The catch is the occupancy, I said. I have 2 unauthorized occupants currently residing in the home. They are family members. They have been there for 2 years. There is no lease agreement, no rent payments, and no written contract. However, they have indicated they will resist eviction and claim tenant rights based on the duration of their stay. I heard a sharp exhale from Monica. Squatters, she said flatly. Basically family squatters. That is messy. Ms. Pierce, Colorado laws are tenant-friendly, even without a lease, if they have received mail there. Getting them out requires a court order. That takes time. and money, and optics. We don't like optics. I am not asking you to like the optics, I said, keeping my voice cold. I am asking if you want to buy the asset. Monica hummed. I can make an offer, but it will not be market value. If we have to inherit a legal battle and hire security to physically remove elderly relatives, I assume they are elderly? 62 and 60, I said. Right. If we have to drag grandparents out of a house in Golden Ridge, the neighbors call the news. It is a headache. I would offer you maybe 70% of the appraised value. Cash. 7-day close. 70%? I did the math in my head. That was around $840,000. It was a lot of money, but it was leaving nearly $400,000 on the table. I took a breath. I had one card left to play. What if I told you that you do not have to drag them out? I asked. Monica stopped typing. How so? I am sending them on a vacation. I said, they have flights booked to Greece in 4 days. They will be out of the country for 2 weeks. The house will be physically vacant. No people, no pets, just furniture. I let that sink in. If we close while they are over the Atlantic Ocean, I continued, you do not need to evict anyone. You just need to change the locks and post a security guard. When they come back, they are not tenants being evicted from their home. They are travelers trying to break into a property owned by a corporation. The legal footing shifts entirely in your favor. There was a silence on the line. It lasted for 10 seconds. Then, Monica let out a low, appreciative whistle. That is cold, she said. I like it. It is necessary, I replied. Okay, Monica said, her voice brisk and businesslike now. If you can guarantee vacancy, and I mean total vacancy, nobody sleeping in a guest room, then the risk factor drops by 90%. I can do better than 70. How much better? I asked. If we can close in 5 days, before they land in Athens, I will give you $980,000, cash wire. We take the property as is. We handle the furniture removal. We handle the parents when they return. You walk away clean. $980,000. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was a new life. Send the contract to Daniel Ross. I said, done, she replied. And Ms. Pierce? Yes. Don't get cold feet. Once you sign, it is my house, and I don't do refunds. I won't, I said. I hung up. I stared at the dashboard. My hands were not shaking anymore. I felt a strange, electric buzz in my veins. I had just sold my childhood home, my inheritance, and my parents' retirement plan in a 5-minute phone call. Now, I had to go home and pay for the plane tickets that would seal their fate. I drove back up the mountain, rehearsing my lines. I parked the SUV next to the dumpster that still held the remains of my greenhouse. The sight of it usually made me want to scream, but today, it just fueled my resolve. I walked into the house. Gerald was in the living room, watching golf. Lynn was flipping through a magazine. They both looked up as I entered, their expressions guarded, ready for a fight. I dropped my keys on the counter and took a deep breath. I let my shoulders slump. I forced my eyes to look down at the floor, adopting the posture of the defeated child they loved so much. I am sorry, I said softly. Gerald muted the television. He exchanged a look with Lynn. Sorry for what? He asked, though he knew exactly what he wanted to hear. For the scene yesterday, I said, and for being difficult about the deck. I was just stressed about the contract. But I realized you were right. The greenhouse was old, and the deck will be nice. I should have trusted your judgment. Lynn closed her magazine. She stood up and walked over to me, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. Oh, Harmony, she sighed, reaching out to pat my arm. We know you are stressed. We forgive you. We only want what is best for you. Your father was just saying how much better the property looks already. I forced myself not to recoil from her touch. I want to make it up to you. I said, I know I have been tight with money lately, but I want you to have that trip to Greece. You deserve a break. Gerald sat up straighter. His eyes lit up with pure greed. Well, that is very mature of you. Harmony, he said. "We were worried we might have to cancel. My back has been killing me, and I did not think I could handle the economy seats." I pulled out my laptop. I opened the travel site. "I will book it right now," I said. "And Dad, I will upgrade you to business class. Lie flat seats. You won't feel a thing." Gerald grinned. It was the smile of a predator who had just been fed. "Now that is talking," he said. "See, Lynn, I told you she would come around." I spent the next hour sitting at the kitchen island, the very spot Gerald planned to exile me to, booking the most expensive vacation of their lives. I booked the business class flights. I booked the suites at the Caldera View hotels in Santorini and Mykonos. Then, I did something extra. I transferred $3,000 directly into my mother's bank account. "Spending money," I told them, "so you do not have to worry about the exchange rate." Lynn actually squealed. She hugged me, smelling of gin and expensive perfume. "You are such a good daughter. Harmony, I knew you would do the right thing." I smiled back at her. It was the best acting performance of my life. "Enjoy the trip," I said. "Really, make the most of it." I watched the notifications pop up on my phone. The credit card charges were massive. $11,000 for flights, $8,000 for hotels, $3,000 cash transfer. $22,000. In any other context, it would have been financial suicide. But to me, it was an investment. It was the closing cost on my freedom. Every dollar I spent was another link in the chain that would pull them out of this house and onto that plane. Once everything was booked, I retreated to my room. I had one more logistical hurdle to clear. I needed to disappear digitally before I disappeared physically. I drove into town later that afternoon, telling them I was going to pick up some takeout for dinner. Instead, I went to the Verizon store. I bought a new iPhone. I set it up with a new number, a new iCloud account, and a new email address that no one in my family knew. I sat in the car and began the tedious process of migrating my life. I moved my banking apps to the new phone. I changed my passwords, all of them. I set up two-factor authentication to the new number. I transferred my contacts, carefully deleting anyone who would report back to my parents. Then, I looked at my old phone. It was a 3-year-old model with a cracked screen protector. This device was the leash. It was the number Gerald called when he wanted the sprinklers fixed. It was the number Lynn texted when she wanted wine. It was the digital embodiment of my servitude. I did not wipe it. I did not turn it off. I left it active. I left the ringer on loud. I drove back to the house with the takeout. I walked inside, carrying the food in one hand and my old phone in the other. My new phone was hidden deep inside my laptop bag, silent and secret. Gerald was already talking about how he was going to pack his cigars for the trip. Lynn was looking at swimsuits on her iPad. They had no idea that the daughter standing in front of them, serving them Thai food and nodding at their travel plans, had just sold the roof over their heads. I looked at the old phone sitting on the counter. In a few days, that device would be the only piece of Harmony Pierce left in this house, and by the time they realized why I wasn't answering it, the locks would already be changed. I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger was gone. The fear was gone. There was only the countdown. 4 days. 4 days of playing the good daughter. 4 days of nodding and smiling. And then, the slate would be wiped clean. The drive to Denver International Airport at 4 a.m. was a masterclass in endurance. The sky was pitch black. The highway was empty, and the interior of my SUV was filled with the low-frequency drone of my mother's complaints. "It is freezing," Lynn muttered, adjusting the vents for the 10th time. "I told you to warm up the car before we got in. Harmony, the leather is like ice. You know cold air triggers my migraines." I kept my eyes on the road, my hands at 10 and 2. "I am sorry." "Mom," I said. My voice was calm, practiced. "The heating seat is on high. It will kick in within a minute." "From the back seat?" Gerald cleared his throat. He was not concerned with the temperature. He was concerned with his asset. "Now listen to me," he said, leaning forward so his breath hit my ear. "While we are gone, I want you to water the deck twice a day, morning and evening. That composite wood needs to cure properly in this dry air, or it will warp. I do not want to come back to a warped deck. Harmony. I won't let it warp. Dad, I promised. And the security system, he added, make sure you arm it every time you leave. I do not want any riffraff coming up the driveway. We have a lot of valuables in that house now. I suppressed a smile. He had no idea how right he was. The security was about to be tighter than he could possibly imagine. We pulled up to the departure terminal at 5:15. The curbside was bathed in harsh fluorescent light. I popped the trunk and helped them unload their 4 massive suitcases. They were packing for a royal tour, not a vacation. Lynn wrapped me in a hug that felt more like a formality than an embrace. She patted my back twice, stiffly. Be good, she said. Keep the house clean. Do not let the dishes pile up in the sink just because we are not there to watch you. I won't, I said. Gerald did not hug me. He stood by the curb, checking his watch, looking at the terminal doors as if he were a CEO waiting for a private jet. He turned to me one last time, his eyes sweeping over me with that familiar mix of disappointment and ownership. You hold down the fort, he commanded. Remember, harmony. This house is our legacy. It is where your mother and I are going to spend the rest of our lives. You need to start treating it with more respect. Treat it like you actually own it. I looked him in the eye. I will take care of everything, I said. I watched them walk through the sliding glass doors. They did not look back. They did not wave. They just marched toward the check-in counter, confident that when they returned, I would be waiting there to pick them up, ready to serve. I got back in the car, but I did not leave the curb. I pulled out my phone, the new one, and opened the flight tracker app. I sat there for 45 minutes, watching the little airplane icon move from the gate to the taxiway. I waited until the status changed to in air. Only then did I exhale. The air left my lungs in a long, shuddering rush. They were gone. They were 30,000 feet in the air, hurtling toward the Atlantic Ocean, and they could not turn around. I put the car in drive and merged onto the highway. I did not drive casually. I drove with purpose. The countdown had officially begun. When I pulled into the driveway at Golden Ridge, the sun was just cresting over the mountains, illuminating the timber frame of the house. It looked beautiful. It looked peaceful. And for the first time in 2 years, it was silent. I did not go inside to relax. I walked to the front door and unlocked it for the crew I had hired. 5 minutes later, a large white truck rumbled up the steep driveway. It was not a budget moving company. It was a premium relocation service, the kind that packed for you. I had paid extra for speed and discretion. The foreman, a large man named Mike, walked up to me with a clipboard. "Morning, ma'am," he said. "We have the work order. Destination A and Destination B. You have the tagging system ready?" I nodded. I reached into my bag and pulled out 2 rolls of heavy-duty painter's tape. One roll was bright blue, the other was neon yellow. "Blue is Seattle," I said, my voice sharp and clear. "Blue tape means it is mine. It goes to the small truck. It is fragile. Treat it with care." I pointed to the living room, where my parents' clutter had taken over every surface. "Yellow is storage," I continued. "Yellow means it belongs to the occupants who are vacating. It goes to the big truck. It goes to the warehouse in Aurora. I do not care how you pack it. Just get it out." The crew moved like a swarm of ants. I moved ahead of them, a roll of tape in each hand, making split-second decisions that felt like judicial rulings. My desk? Blue tape? Aunt Margaret's antique rocking chair? Blue tape. The few boxes of books I had managed to keep in my closet? Blue tape. Then I turned to the rest of the house. The hideous beige leather ottoman they had bought? Yellow tape. Lynn's collection of porcelain dolls that stared creepily from the mantelpiece? Yellow tape. The massive king-sized bed in the master suite where they had slept for 2 years while I cramped in the guest room? Yellow tape. It was satisfying. It was visceral. Every strip of yellow tape I ripped off the roll felt like I was peeling a leech off my skin. The sound of the tape, rip, slap, became the rhythm of my liberation. By noon, The house was a chaotic maze of cardboard boxes. The blue pile was modest, enough to fill a studio apartment. The yellow pile was a mountain. It was a physical manifestation of how much space they had consumed. Then, I went to the master bedroom for the final piece of the puzzle. Gerald's closet. I found it on the top shelf. His humidor. It was a beautiful box. Spanish cedar. Polished to a shine. He loved this box more than he loved most people. He kept his cohibas in there, humidified to exactly 70%. I carried it to the kitchen island. I opened it. The smell of rich tobacco wafted out. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old phone. The screen was cracked. The battery was at 100%. I had connected it to a portable power bank, a brick of a battery meant to charge a laptop for days. I plugged the cable in, wrapped the excess cord tightly around the battery, and taped the whole bundle together with electrical tape. It was a heavy, dense brick of technology. I lifted the cedar tray that held the cigars. There was a space underneath for the humidification packets. I removed the packets. I placed the phone and the battery into the hollow space at the bottom of the box. I checked the volume switch on the side of the phone. It was set to maximum. The ringtone was the default, piercing digital bell. I lowered the tray of cigars back over it. It fit perfectly. I closed the lid. The latch clicked shut. I handed the box to Mike. "This goes in the yellow pile," I said, "but listen to me carefully. This box needs to be buried." Mike looked at me, confused. "Buried, ma'am?" "When you pack the storage unit," I explained, "I want this box at the very back. I want it behind the mattress, behind the sofa, behind the heavy wardrobe. I want it so deep that you would have to move every single piece of furniture in that 10 by 10 unit to reach it." Mike shrugged. He had seen stranger things in his line of work. "You are the boss, back of the unit, buried." I watched him carry the box out to the truck. I imagined the scene in 2 weeks. Gerald, frantic, knowing his precious cigars were somewhere in that unit. And from the depths of the pile, the muffled, ghostly sound of a phone ringing, ringing and ringing, powered by a battery that would last for a week, calling out from a place he could not reach. By 3 p.m, the trucks were loaded. The house echoed. It was stripped bare. The walls were blank. The floors were empty. The movers left. I stood alone in the hollow shell of the living room. I did not feel sad. I felt clean. I pulled out my laptop and finalized the last transfers. My bank accounts were closed. The joint account I had shared with my mother for emergencies was empty. My mailing address was forwarded to a P.O. box in Seattle. At 4 o'clock, the cleaning crew arrived. This was not a standard maid service. This was a forensic-level cleaning team I had booked to ensure the property was showroom-ready for Summit Ridge. They scrubbed the baseboards. They steam-cleaned the carpets where Gerald had spilled red wine. They wiped down the walls. They scoured the bathrooms until the air smelled of industrial bleach and lemon zest. They scrubbed away the smell of my father's cologne. They scrubbed away the scent of my mother's hairspray. They erased the family. When they left at 8 o'clock, the house felt cold. It felt sterile. It did not feel like a home anymore. It felt like an asset, which was exactly what it was. I slept on an air mattress in the middle of the empty living room that night. It was the best sleep I had had in 2 years. The next morning, at 9 o'clock sharp, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. 2 men in dark tactical polos and cargo pants got out. They were followed by a woman in a sharp blazer, Monica Blake's associate. I met them at the door. "Ms. Pierce?" the woman asked. "Yes." She handed me a clipboard. Final walkthrough. We walked through the empty rooms. Their boots echoed on the hardwood. They checked the thermostats. They checked the water pressure. They checked the windows. "It is empty," the woman noted, checking a box on her form. "And clean. Monica will be pleased." She motioned to the 2 men. One of them went to the front door with a drill. The other went to the back patio. I watched as they unscrewed the smart locks I had installed. I watched them pull the hardware out of the wood. They replaced them with heavy-duty, commercial-grade deadbolts, keypad access, biometric scanners. The man at the front door looked at me. "We are changing the access codes now. Ma'am, do you have any other keys?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the single brass key I had kept on my ring, the key Aunt Margaret had given me. I looked at it for a moment. I thought I would hesitate. I thought I would feel a pang of regret. I didn't. I handed it to him. "Here," I said. He took it, slid it into a pouch, and turned back to the lock. The woman handed me an envelope. "The wire transfer has been initiated," she said. "It should hit your account within the hour. $980,000. Thank you." She looked around the empty living room. "You are cutting it close," she said. "The flight from Greece lands in 14 days?" 13 now, I corrected. She smiled, a thin, sharp expression. "Well, by the time they get here, this property will be under 24-hour surveillance. We are installing cameras this afternoon. If they step onto the driveway, it is trespassing. We will have the sheriff here in 10 minutes. "That sounds secure," I said. "It is," she replied. "You should get going. Ms. Pierce, once we activate the alarm, your presence here will be unauthorized." I picked up my bag. I walked out the front door. I did not look back at the view of the valley. I did not look at the spot where the greenhouse used to be. I walked straight to my car. As I started the engine, I heard a loud beep-beep from the house. The new alarm system was armed. The light on the front panel turned from green to red. The house was sealed. The fortress was closed. I put the car in reverse and backed down the driveway for the last time. I passed the dumpster, which was still there, waiting to be hauled away. I drove down the winding road of Golden Ridge, leaving the silence behind me. My phone, the new one, buzzed in the passenger seat. Bank notification. Wire transfer received. Amount, $980,000. I smiled. I hit the gas. The road to Seattle was long, but I had plenty of fuel, a loaded bank account, and the absolute certainty that when Gerald and Lynn returned, they would find that their retirement plan had been foreclosed upon. I was sitting in my new apartment in Seattle, 1,000 miles away from the drama, but thanks to the wonders of modern technology, I had a front row seat to the finale. It was 10 o'clock at night. Outside my window, the rain was falling in sheets against the glass, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon. Inside, the only light came from the glow of my laptop screen. I had logged into the smart home security app for the Golden Ridge house. Summit Ridge Capital had changed the physical locks and the alarm codes, but their IT department had not yet revoked the master admin privileges on the doorbell camera system. I likely had another 24 hours before they reset the network credentials. That was all the time I needed. I had the flight tracker open in a separate tab. Their flight from Athens had touched down in Denver at 7:30 in the evening, by my calculations, allowing for baggage claim and the 45-minute taxi ride up into the foothills. They were due any second. I took a sip of tea. My pulse was steady. This did not feel like watching a horror movie where you cover your eyes. It felt like watching the launch of a rocket you had spent years building. Then, motion detected at the front door. The camera feed flickered from black to a crisp, high-definition night view. Twin headlights cut through the darkness of the driveway, illuminating the fresh gravel. A yellow taxi van pulled up right to the front steps. The driver hopped out to unload the trunk, but Gerald and Lynn were already out. They looked tan. They looked rested. Gerald was wearing a linen blazer and a fedora he must have bought in a tourist shop in Mykonos. Lynn was laughing, pointing at something in the sky, her movements loose and fluid. They were drunk on expensive wine and the absolute certainty that they were returning to their castle. I watched Gerald drag 2 massive suitcases up the slate steps. He dropped them with a heavy thud that the microphone picked up clearly. He stretched his back, making a show of his chronic pain, then reached for the keypad on the front door. I leaned in closer to the screen. He punched in the code. I knew that sequence by heart. It was his birthday. Beep, 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 beep. The small LED light above the handle did not turn green. It flashed a harsh, solid red. Gerald paused. He stared at the lock. He shook his head. likely thinking he had fumbled a digit due to the jet lag or the gin. He typed it again, slower this time, deliberate, one finger at a time. Beep, 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 beep. Read. The lock made a low, mechanical grinding sound, the sound of a deadbolt refusing to disengage. "What is wrong with it?" I heard Lynn ask. Her voice was tinny through the camera speaker. She walked up the steps, her heels clicking on the stone. "You probably forgot the code. Gerald, move." She nudged him aside. She typed in the code she used. It was her birthday. Beep, 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 beep. Read. Lynn frowned. She jiggled the handle. It was locked tight. "It must be the battery," she said, her voice rising in pitch. "Harmony probably forgot to change the batteries. Useless girl. I told her to check everything before we left." Gerald looked annoyed. He kicked the door lightly. "Harmony," he shouted. "Open the door. We are home." Silence. The house stood dark and imposing behind them. They stepped off the porch and walked around the side of the house. I switched camera feeds to the patio south view. I saw them trying the sliding glass door. Locked. I saw Gerald trying to force the kitchen window. Locked. I saw them circle back to the front, their movements becoming less fluid and more jerky. The vacation glow was evaporating, replaced by the cold mountain air and rising panic. "Call her," Lynn snapped. "She is probably sleeping with headphones on." Gerald pulled his phone from his pocket. I saw the screen light up his face. He dialed my old number. I closed my eyes for a second, visualizing where that call was going. 30 miles away, in a cold but concrete storage unit in Aurora, buried behind a wall of cardboard boxes and furniture, inside a Spanish cedar humidor, beneath a tray of drying tobacco. My old phone lit up. It rang in the darkness. Ring, ring, ring. The sound would be muffled, barely a whisper against the insulation of the unit. The battery pack I had taped to it was humming, keeping it alive, ensuring the signal went through. On the screen in Seattle, I watched Gerald hold the phone to his ear. He waited. He paced. He pulled the phone away, looked at it, and redialed. "She is not picking up," he spat, straight to voicemail. "Keep calling," Lynn shrieked. "It is 40 degrees out here. I am not standing in the cold because she is too lazy to wake up." Gerald called again and again. In the storage unit, the phone rang and rang, a digital ghost screaming into the void. On the porch, Gerald slammed his hand against the wood of the door. "Damn it! Harmony, wake up!" He started kicking the door harder. That was when the headlights appeared. A black SUV, sleek and menacing, rolled silently up the driveway. It did not have taxi markings. It had tinted windows and government plates. It stopped directly behind the taxi, blocking it in. The driver's door opened. Ethan Cole stepped out. I had never met Ethan in person, but Monica had described him. He was the cleaner. He was tall, dressed in a dark tactical jacket and slate gray trousers. He held a clipboard in one hand and a high-powered flashlight in the other. He did not look like a neighbor coming to help. He looked like private security. Gerald shielded his eyes against the glare of the flashlight. "Who is that?" Gerald called out, aggressive but shaky. "We do not need a ride. We live here. We are just locked out." Ethan did not lower the light. He walked up the driveway with long, purposeful strides. He stopped exactly 10 feet from the porch stairs. "Sir, ma'am," Ethan said. His voice was deep, calm, and carried zero warmth. "I need you to step away from the door." "Excuse me?" Lynn said, putting on her best offended dowager voice. "This is our house. Our daughter is inside. She changed the code by accident." Ethan looked down at his clipboard, then back up at them. "There is no one inside, ma'am," Ethan said, "and this is not your house." Gerald laughed, but it was a nervous, broken sound. "Of course it is my house. I am Gerald Pierce. My daughter is Harmony Pierce. Now, either help us open this door or get off my property before I call the police." Ethan lowered the flashlight just enough to illuminate his own face. He looked bored. "Mr. Pierce," he said, The property located at 440 Ridge Lane was sold 14 days ago. The title was transferred to Summit Ridge Capital. The closing was finalized on the 3rd of the month. The previous owner, Ms. Harmony Pierce, vacated the premises and handed over possession prior to closing. Gerald froze. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. "Sold?" he whispered. "That is impossible. She cannot sell it. She is in there." "She is not," Ethan repeated. "The house is vacant. It is a corporate asset now." "No!" Lynn screamed. She lunged forward. "She is lying. She is playing a game. Harmony, come out here right now. Stop this sick joke." Ethan did not flinch. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. He held it out. "This is a copy of the deed transfer," he said, "signed and notarized. And here's a copy of the trespass warning." Gerald snatched the paper. He held it under the porch light. I watched his eyes scan the document. I watched his face drain of all color. He saw the date. He saw the sale price. He saw my signature. $980,000, he choked out. She sold it for cash." He looked up at the house, his eyes wild. He looked at the camera lens, almost as if he knew I was watching. "She cannot do this," he roared. "We have rights. We live here. We have tenants' rights." Ethan took a step forward. This was the part Daniel had warned me about. This was the muscle phase. "You have no rights to this property." "Mr. Pierce," Ethan said, his voice hardening like concrete. "You have no lease. You have no title. You are not on the deed. As of this moment, you are trespassing on private corporate land." Ethan gestured to the driveway. "Your personal belongings were removed from the premises prior to closing, per the seller's instructions." Ethan lied smoothly, or perhaps it wasn't a lie, since he considered the storage unit removed. "Everything inside this house belongs to Summit Ridge." He pointed to the pile of luggage on the porch. "Those bags are the only things you are taking with you." Gerald dropped the paper. He looked at the heavy door. He looked at the smart lock that denied him entry. He slammed his fist against the wood one last time. "Harmony!" he screamed. It was a primal, desperate sound. "I know you can hear me. You ungrateful bitch! Open this door!" Ethan tapped his earpiece. "Control. We have a code 4 at the Ridge property," he said, loud enough for them to hear. "Subject is hostile. Dispatch the sheriff's deputies." The mention of the sheriff broke them. Lynn grabbed Gerald's arm. Her face was a mask of terror. "Gerald," she hissed, "the police. We cannot be arrested. Not here. Not in front of the neighbors." Gerald looked at Ethan. He looked at the gun belt Ethan was wearing. It wasn't a gun, just a taser and pepper spray. But in the dark, it looked lethal enough. "You cannot do this," Gerald whispered. "We have nowhere to go." Ethan checked his watch. "You have 5 minutes to move your luggage to the public road," he said. "After that, I will let the deputies handle the removal." He turned on his flashlight again, aiming it directly at their feet. "Move." It was the most satisfying visual I had ever seen. The two people who had spent 2 years treating me like a servant, who had called me a burden, who had planned to steal my office and my future, were now dragging their heavy, expensive suitcases down the gravel driveway in the dark. Gerald stumbled. He dropped a bag. He cursed. He picked it up. Lynn was sobbing now, a real, ugly cry, not the manipulative tears she used on me. They reached the edge of the asphalt. They stood next to the taxi that was still waiting, the driver looking confused and impatient. Ethan stood on the porch, watching them. He did not leave. He stood guard over over his company's asset. I watched them load their bags into the taxi. I watched them argue with the driver. I watched them get into the back seat, defeated, small, and homeless. The taxi backed out. The red taillights faded down the mountain road. Ethan Cole turned to the camera. He looked right into the lens. He nodded once, a professional acknowledgement to the invisible admin. Then, he reached up and placed a piece of black electrical tape over the lens. The screen went black. I sat in the silence of my Seattle apartment. The rain was still falling. The tea in my mug was cold. I closed the laptop. It was done. They were gone. The house was gone. The burden was gone. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked at the reflection of my own face in the glass. I looked different. I looked lighter. I walked to the kitchen and poured the cold tea down the sink. I opened a bottle of wine, a cheap bottle, one I bought with my own money, for my own apartment. I poured a glass. "Here is to the burden," I whispered to the empty room. I took a drink. It tasted like victory. I waited exactly 60 minutes after the camera feed went black. I poured myself a second glass of cheap wine and sat on the floor of my unfurnished living room, watching the rain streak against the Seattle skyline. I gave them 1 hour. That was enough time for the taxi to drop them off at whatever roadside motel they could find at 11 o'clock at night. It was enough time for them to check in, drag those heavy suitcases into a room that smelled of stale cigarettes, and realize that their high-speed internet and Egyptian cotton sheets were gone. It was enough time for the panic to curdle into rage. My new phone sat silently on the floor beside me. My old phone, buried deep in the storage unit in Aurora, was likely dead or wringing its heart out inside a cedar box. I opened my laptop. I did not open a text message window. Texting implies a conversation. Texting implies that a reply is expected. I opened my email client. This was not a conversation. This was a notification. I typed their email addresses into the recipient field. I did not copy anyone else. This was just for us. Subject: regarding the property at Golden Ridge. My fingers hovered over the keys. For a moment, I felt the ghost of the old Harmony, the one who would have apologized, the one who would have tried to soften the blow. But then I remembered the sound of the greenhouse glass shattering. I remembered the bruise on my hip from the desk. I remembered Gerald's voice saying I was a pushover. I began to type. Gerald and Lynn. By the time you read this, you will have realized that the locks at Golden Ridge have been changed. You have met Mr. Cole. You have seen the deed transfer documents. Let me be clear about the facts so there is no confusion. The house was my sole property. It was titled in my name alone. I have sold it to Summit Ridge Capital for a cash sum. The sale is final. The transfer is recorded. I have no legal obligation to provide housing for you, and as you had no lease and paid no rent, your occupancy was terminated upon the sale of the asset. I know you are angry. I know you are currently screaming that I'm an ungrateful daughter, but before you play the victim card, I want you to think back to the night I lost my contract with Neuropath. I left the house to go to a diner because I could not breathe. You called me at 3 a.m. to fix the sprinklers. You thought you hung up the phone. You didn't. I heard everything. I heard you call me a burden. I heard you compare me to a money tree that you just have to shake to get cash. I heard you laughing about how my fake job was gone, and how that was good for you because it trapped me. I heard your plan to use my own money to fight me in court, to claim sweat equity for a deck I never wanted, and to drag out an eviction for 18 months just so you could live for free. You were right about one thing. Dad, I was a money tree, but you shook the tree too hard, and it fell on you. You wanted to use the law to trap me? I decided to use the law to free myself. I sold the house to a corporation because I knew they would not hesitate to remove you. I beat you to the punch. Regarding your belongings, everything has been moved to a secure storage facility. The address is Safekeep Storage, Unit 402, on East Colfax. The access code is the last 4 digits of the Social Security number you used to open credit cards in my name when I was in college. I figured you would remember that. I have paid the rental fee for 1 full year. After 12 months, if you have not moved your things, the facility will auction them off. That is your problem, not mine. Also, Gerald, if you are wondering why I am not answering my old phone, you will find it inside your cigar humidor. I buried it at the very back of the storage unit, behind the mattresses. If you want to stop the ringing, you are going to have to dig for it. Do not try to find me. Do not try to call me. I have forwarded all the recordings of your threats and plans to my attorney, Daniel Ross. If you attempt to locate my new address or harass me, I will file for an immediate restraining order. You wanted a retirement plan. You have your luggage and a year of free storage. Figure it out. Harmony. I read it over once. It was cold. It was metallic. It was perfect. I hit send. The moment the email whooshed away, I picked up my new phone. I went into the settings. I had already blocked their numbers, but I knew them. They were resourceful when they were desperate. I went into the carrier settings and engaged a feature I had researched days ago: silence unknown callers. If a number was not in my contacts, the phone would not ring. It would go straight to a silent voicemail box. I put the phone down and waited. It took 11 minutes. They must have checked their email on their phones in the motel lobby. The screen of my new phone lit up, blocked call. Then another. Unknown number. Then another, unknown number. They were using the motel phone. They were using the taxi driver's phone. They were probably borrowing phones from strangers in the parking lot. The notifications stacked up on my lock screen like a digital pileup. Missed call. Missed call. Missed call. New voicemail. New voicemail. New voicemail. I did not answer. I let the silence in my apartment stretch out, thick and heavy. I finished my wine. I walked to the kitchen and rinsed the glass. After 20 minutes, the barrage slowed down. The initial explosion of rage was exhausting itself. Now came the messages. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I knew it was Lynn. How could you do this to us? We are your parents. We are sitting in a motel room with bugs in the carpet. Your father is having chest pains. If he has a heart attack, it is on your hands. Call us immediately. I swiped left. Delete. 2 minutes later, another text. This one sounded like Gerald. You think you are smart? You committed fraud. That house was a family asset. We are going to sue you. We are going to sue the buyer. You will be in jail by the end of the week. Pick up the phone, you coward. I swiped left. Delete. Then, the tone shifted. The anger was not working. The threats were hitting a wall of silence. So they switched to the weapon that had worked for 29 years. Guilt. Harmony, please. A new text read, We are sorry about what we said. We were just venting. We love you. We were just scared about money. Please don't leave us like this. We are old. We cannot start over. Just tell us where you are. We can fix this. I stared at the words, we love you. 2 weeks ago, those words would have broken me. I would have called them back. I would have sent money. I would have apologized for making them sad. But tonight, I read them and I felt nothing. I looked at the words like they were a foreign language I used to speak but had forgotten. I opened the voicemail app. I needed to keep a record, just in case. I played the first one. It was Gerald. Harmony! His voice was distorted, cracking with fury. You little bitch! You sold my house? I built that deck. I put my blood into that place. You cannot do this. I am going to find you. I am going to wring your neck. I saved the file. I labeled it, Threat Gerald 01. I played the second one. It was Lynn. She was weeping. It was a wet, ragged sound. Baby, please. It is Mom. We are so cold. The taxi driver took all our cash. We don't know where to go. The storage unit is closed until morning. We don't have toothbrushes. Harmony, please pick up. We forgive you. Just come get us. We forgive you. I almost laughed. They forgave me? For selling the house they were trying to steal? The audacity was breathtaking. I saved the file. I labeled it, Guilt Lynn 1. I selected the 2 audio files and attached them to a new email. I addressed it to Daniel Ross. Subject, Evidence for file. Body, Daniel. Just in case they find me, here are the first responses. I am not engaging. I sent it. Then, I did something I had promised myself I would do. I went to the settings menu on my phone. I turned off all notifications. No banners, no sounds, no red badges. I put the phone face down on the floor. The storm was raging outside, both the rain in Seattle and the hurricane I had unleashed in Denver. But inside my apartment, it was quiet. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. I saw thousands of lights. Thousands of people living their lives. I was one of them now. I was just a person in an apartment. I was not a daughter. I was not a bank. I was not a retirement plan. I imagined Gerald digging through a mountain of furniture in a freezing storage unit, hunting for a ringing phone inside a cigar box. I imagined him finding it, seeing my name on the screen, realizing that even though he was holding my phone, he could not reach me. I took a deep breath. The air in the apartment smelled like fresh paint and rain. It did not smell like old lavender or wet concrete. It smelled like zero. I lay down on the floor, wrapped in my blanket. The phone buzzed once more against the floorboards. A final, dying gasp from the past life. I closed my eyes and let it buzz. I was already asleep before the screen went dark. 3 days later, I was sitting in a glass-walled booth in a co-working space in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle. The coffee was strong, the Wi-Fi was fast, and for the first time in 2 years, nobody was asking me to fix a printer or complaining about the temperature. My laptop chimed with an incoming video call. It was Daniel Ross. I adjusted my headset and clicked accept. Daniel's face filled the screen. He looked tired, likely from dealing with the barrage of frantic legal threats my parents had been trying to hurl at his office. But he was smiling. "Hello, Harmony," he said. "Hi, Daniel. Is it bad?" I asked. Daniel chuckled, leaning back in his leather chair. "It is loud," he corrected, "but it is not bad. I have reviewed the emails and the voicemails you sent me. I also received a very aggressively worded letter from a strip mall lawyer your father hired, claiming constructive eviction and elder abuse." My stomach tightened reflexively. The old fear was a hard habit to break. "Do I need to be worried?" I asked. "No," Daniel said firmly. "I sent a reply this morning. I reminded his counsel that you were the sole owner of the property, that there was no lease, and that the property has been sold to a third party. I also attached the trespass warning that Summit Ridge Capital issued." He paused to let that sink in. "Harmony, they have no case. They have no standing. They are screaming at a wall. And the best part? The wall isn't you anymore." I felt my shoulders drop 2 inches. "So if they try to go back," I asked, "if they try to break in?" Daniel shook his head. "That is not your problem. If they step foot on that driveway, they are not dealing with their daughter. They are dealing with Summit Ridge. And let me tell you, Summit Ridge has lawyers who eat guys like your father for breakfast. You are clear. Harmony, the legal shield is holding." "Thank you, Daniel," I whispered, "for everything." "Don't thank me yet," he said, glancing at his other monitor. "Check your bank account. The escrow cleared 10 minutes ago." I opened a new tab. I navigated to my banking portal. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed in my new password. The page loaded. I stared at the balance. $980,000. It was sitting there in black and white. It looked surreal, like a glitch in the Matrix. I had to count the zeros. I had to say the number inside my head to believe it. It was real. This was not just currency. It was time. It was freedom. It was the physical manifestation of my refusal to be used. I did not just stare at it. I went to work. I immediately initiated 3 transfers. First, I moved 30% of the total into a separate high-yield holding account labeled taxes. I was not going to let the IRS catch me slipping. Second, I moved $500,000 into a diversified investment portfolio that Daniel had recommended, funds that I could not touch easily, ensuring that no matter what happened, I would never be destitute again. And third, I moved $100,000 into a business checking account. I left the rest in savings for a down payment on a place of my own. Someday, but not yet. As I watched the transfer complete screens pop up, I realized something profound. Not a single cent of this money was going to pay for a deck I hated. Not a penny was going to buy wine for Lynn. Not a dime was going to fund a trip to Greece to soothe Gerald's ego. For the first time in my life, the fruit of my labor and my inheritance was feeding me. My phone buzzed against the desk. It was a number I did not recognize, but it was a local Seattle area code. I picked it up. "This is Harmony." "Hi, Harmony. This is Sarah from Mindful Tech. We met on the forum last week? My heart skipped a beat. Mindful Tech was a small, aggressive startup focusing on teletherapy accessibility. I had sent them my portfolio, the one Gerald had mocked, just 2 days ago. "Hi, Sarah," I said, sitting up straighter. "Look, I will cut to the chase," Sarah said. "We looked at your user flow for the crisis intervention module. It is brilliant. It is exactly the kind of empathy-driven design we are missing. We want to bring you on as a contract lead. It is remote, flexible, and the equity package is decent. When can you start?" I looked at the bank balance on my screen. I looked at the rain falling outside. "I can start today," I said. I signed the contract electronically 10 minutes later. It was not a massive corporate gig. It did not have a flashy title, but it was mine. I had gotten it without my parents' support, and I would keep it without their interference. That evening, I walked back to my rental apartment. It was a small studio in a quiet building. It did not have a view of a valley. It did not have a timber frame. It had cheap laminate floors and white walls. But it was quiet. There were only 3 boxes in the corner. The blue tape boxes. I had unpacked my clothes and my laptop, but there was one thing I had saved for last. I walked over to the box marked Fragile. I opened the top and carefully pulled out a small plastic pot. Inside was a mint plant. It was a cutting I had taken from Aunt Margaret's greenhouse the night before the concrete truck arrived. I had hidden it in my car cup holder. It had traveled with me to the diner, to the hotel, and all the way to Seattle. It was a little wilted, a little shocked from the journey, but the roots were strong. I carried it out to the small balcony. The city air was cool and damp. I set the pot on the railing. I breathed in. I could smell the rain, the exhaust of the city, and the faint, sharp scent of peppermint. I did not hear a golf game on the TV. I did not hear ice clinking in a glass. I did not hear the heavy footsteps of a man who thought he owned me. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I opened my email one last time. I found the longest email Lynn had ever sent me. She had written it a year ago, during one of our fights about money. It was a manifesto of guilt. She had listed every sacrifice she had made, every diaper she had changed, every dollar they had spent on my education. She had ended it with the line, "You owe us your life. Harmony. We are your origin." I looked at the words. For years, I had believed them. I had believed that being born was a debt I had to repay with my soul. But as I stood there, with nearly $1 million in the bank and a job that valued my brain, I realized the truth. Children do not owe their parents interest on the cost of their own birth. Love is not a transaction, and family is not a suicide pact. I moved the cursor to the trash can icon. I did not hesitate. Delete. The email vanished. It was a small digital action, but it felt like a physical weight had been cut from my ankles. The invisible rope that had tethered me to their guilt, to their needs, to their retirement plan, snapped. I looked at the mint plant. I touched one of the fuzzy green leaves. Aunt Margaret had once told me, "Home is not about the walls. Harmony. Home is the place where you do not have to be afraid of the people you live with." I looked back into my empty, small, quiet apartment. I had sold a mansion to buy a studio. I had sold a legacy to buy a future. And standing there, alone in the rain, I knew I had made the trade of a lifetime. I walked back inside and sat down at my desk. I opened a new folder on my desktop. I needed a place to save the files for my new job, for my new tax documents, for the designs I was about to create. I typed in the name of the folder. New Start. I hit enter. The folder appeared, clean and empty, waiting to be filled. And for the first time in 29 years, so was I. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was not an easy journey, but freedom was worth every penny of that house. I would love to know where you are listening from. Are you tuning in from a quiet apartment like mine? Or somewhere else? Please let me know in the comments below. I read all of them, and if you enjoyed watching me turn the tables, please make sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, hit that like button, And smash the hype button so this video can reach more people who might need to hear that it is okay to choose yourself. Stay strong, and remember, you are not a burden.